Hello, 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 and welcome to the latest, fifth episode of the APAC Hybrid Cloud Kopi Hour. I am so excited to be back with our show. I wanted to, again, just remind everyone of the link to the playlist where we've got previous shows. And as I always do, remind you why we call this the Kopi Hour. Kopi is a traditional coffee beverage that you find in Southeast Asia. It is delicious. I have my official Kopi cup. That is Nescafe in there, but that's okay because I am not in Singapore. So I do that. And the other exciting thing I want to kind of call out is today starts and kicks off the FIFA Women's World Cup. So for our participants today who are all located across Australia and New Zealand, it's kind of exciting. We've got games in Sydney and in Auckland and a few other places. I think Wellington has them too. So that's super exciting. Now, firstly, who am I? I am August Simonelli. I'm a technical marketing manager here at Red Hat, and I have been running the Kopi Hour for the last year or so. And I am, as always, joined by my favorite co-host, Dev Shanbag. Dev, say hello. How are you doing today, this cold winter's day?
Very well, August. Thanks for another Kopi hour. It's cold and rainy outside, and I'm sipping some nice hot coffee here along with me. Just to go with this session.
That's right. So
Um,
that's excellent. So you've got the coffee hour happening. I love it.
and very excited to be joined by some of our esteemed colleagues. Interesting talk today. We are all going to be diving into, managing Kubernetes deployments at scale, and these colleagues of ours, they'll talk to a lot of our customers and hear about all the challenges our customers face and present to them, some sort of simplicity in all the management and things and how they go. So really excited to be part of this one.
Yeah, that's a great introduction, and that's what I love about the show is that we're able to bring in these colleagues of ours who are working directly with customers. So are seeing it directly as it's happening. So let's actually introduce everyone. Say a quick hello. I'm going to go alphabetically by last name. So I think I've got this right. So first up is James Blair. He's a specialist solution architect here at Red Hat, based in New Zealand. Say hi, James.
Good afternoon, team. How are we doing? So I'm James Blair, Specialist Architect in Wellington, New Zealand, and been with Red Hat for about a year. For a little bit of trivia, I'm a Kubernetes contributor and an etcd contributor. And how am I feeling today? Mixed bag. I'm feeling a little under the weather, so I'm on the water to try and stay hydrated. But I had some good news that I had a talk accepted for Kubernetes Community Day in Australia next month, so I'm looking forward to that. So that was cool. Yeah, that's me.
That's great. So you're having the APAC Hybrid Cloud Water Hour. So
Yeah, that's it.
So next up out of Melbourne, we have Simone Delord, who is a associate principal specialist solution architect with Red Hat. Say hi, Simone. Tell us how you're doing today.
Bonjour, hi everyone. Simon. I'm pretty happy to be part of the Kopi Club. I don't have my Kopi cup though. August, I don't know. You're mean to it without any type of.
Yeah, I should have sent them out before the show. Everyone would have it.
Okay. Well, hopefully, but that's okay. All right. I'm pretty excited to be part of this session. And yeah, like James, I'm not a contributor. James, a rock star. I'm just a product specialist around OpenShift and talking to a lot of our customers for the last 3 years around the multi-cluster management, the hybrid cloud approach, and what are the challenges they see and how we try and address them with that.
Excellent. And now our next guest is here in Sydney, and this is Wayne Dovey. Wayne's also Associate Principal Specialist Solution Architect with Red Hat. Say hi, Wayne.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here. And of course, also such a topical subject that we're approaching today. I think a lot of the customers we deal with have so many challenges with not only new tech, but just sort of figuring out the landscape. So hopefully with Red Hat's help, we help to simplify this and sort of have a real good picture and, get away from the buzzwords and actually show this off. I myself have been with Red Hat for 8 years. So it's been quite a journey. And if I think back, August and me originally chatted at Red Hat and we were talking about OpenStack. Now, the funny world is we all do things on OpenShift, but Kubernetes seems to be the flavor of the day, even though OpenStack is still pretty good and used well, by a few customers. I think things have changed. It's evolved.
Yeah, definitely. And what's kind of fun is a fun fact about Wayne. I think, Wayne, if you remember, I think I interviewed you. I think I was part of the screening joined the OpenStack team. So
great questions. And ironically, I didn't work much on OpenStack anyway, so it's a funny word. But I mean, I was part of the first sort of team to do implementation of OpenShift version 3, if people know that version. And of course, there was version 3.001. It might have been the first cut that I actually deployed at a customer for a proof of concept. Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. Challenging.
Cool. Well, and that's the thing. So we've got people here who have their hands on the technology, who can show us the technology. But I want to start by something I like to do is I like to dive into these various surveys that they take of the industry. And so Flexera released the 2023 State of the Cloud report. And so I'm digging through it, and I find the easier one to look at is the number of companies that use multiple public clouds, right? So we have quite a lot using multiple public clouds, 16% as well go on a single cloud. So now I find that really interesting. And I thought, so if they're using multiple public and private clouds and they're trying to manage these things, that's what got me thinking about this show. And of course, I work at Red Hat and I'm aware of our technologies. I thought, so how do customers and how does the world perceive using this stuff? So the next thing I decided to do was, well, obviously, the other way, is I asked Bard. Right? I said, I didn't go with ChatGPT because I'm a little alternative here. I went for Bard. And I asked the question, how many companies use multiple clouds? Right? I want to tap into the AI zeitgeist. And what I love about the response here, I don't know if it's a glorified search engine or there's something happening here, but what I love about the response here is that the common reasons are performance, cost, flexibility, and security. And the challenges are basically complexity, cost, and security. So I found that funny because the reasons are the same, right? So it's kind of like what that must do for people when they're sitting down going, this is complicated. How am I going to handle this? So then I decided to look at one more interesting statistic. I dug deeper into the survey, and they had a thing about like what services are growing and becoming challenges for enterprises. Everything is going down, which I'm really happy to hear, right? So the message is getting out there. Hybrid cloud is happening. But one thing went up, managing multi-cloud. It went up from 72 to 80%. So organizations are having to deal with all this. They're embracing all this, and it's becoming a challenge for them. And I found that really interesting. It got me wondering, and I was thrilled to think I have this group of people to tell me about this, is, how are customers dealing with that? They're embracing multiple clouds. They're embracing hybrid. They're embracing multi-cloud. So how are they doing it? And that's where we get that. This is a complex landscape. So how do our customers navigate something like this? And you are the group to tell me and show me how that happens. And we have some prepared content, but you guys are hitting this each day, and I'm just curious, what comes top to mind when you walk in and you say to the customer, I know you want to use 15 different clouds or whatever. What do they say? What's it like?
I think from our point of view, it's a little bit of a conundrum we're in because there's such a landscape of choice for customers. And, you look at the CNCF landscape, for instance, it's like, oh, wow, kind of trying to disseminate what's supported, what's stable, what's the options. I mean, I was a sysadmin in the UK, and I was dealing with like large scale environments. And the challenge for me was trying to figure out how to solve this problem in the easiest way and get it supported, as well as making sure I've got skilled people to support me. So exactly the same challenges exist now. I think we're just doing things a little bit smarter and a little bit more laser focused. So having vendors like Red Hat who deal with these things, I think that's the biggest reason I get called to talk to customers is, what's your experience? What's the best practices? How you guys solving these issues? And at the same time, can you give us a hand with some of these challenges, really?
Yeah, that's right. If I can jump in on this one, I think what's interesting is I found very different type of angles. So I work with lots of different customers, whether it's the government sector, the mining sector, the financial sector, so banks and insurances, the telco as well, right? And drivers for some of them, maybe not drivers for the others. So I've got customers that actually are all in cloud, want to bring stuff back in on-prem because it's too expensive, or they find there's some security breach somewhere, data sovereignty problems. I've got customers that the only one thing they have is to move anything away from the on-prem data center to a cloud environment. And then after that, they look at typically the business continuity type of solutions for that. That's where the multi-cloud sometimes comes in, right? So there's different angles, and then I think the main problem for that is really around the visibility, the technology to do that, if you want, as smoothly as possible, and the compliance component side of things in terms of governance. How do I make sure that what I deploy complies with my access controls, my regulation, that I don't deploy the wrong payload in the wrong environment, those type of things, right? These are typical the problem I see dealing with customers.
Yeah. Just one very quick thought. I mean, the bottom line I kind of see is Kubernetes adoption just seems to inevitably mean multi-cluster for anyone that's going that direction. And if you're in that world, it seems to be a constant state of flux, whether it's new clusters needing to come up and it's a lifecycle challenge, whether it's a migration from A to B and it's a connectivity challenge. It's just inevitable.
But also, I mean, one observation I'd like to put forward is that we seem to be moving away from these big, massive Kubernetes or OpenShift clusters to these sort of more kind of smaller clusters, and that's obviously fueled this desire to have a management control plane for these clusters. So that's also changed the way that people work with things. And I mean, for me, the biggest sort of discovery over the last couple of years has been the GitOps pattern that we're adopting, and for me that kind of brings in consistency. And of course, we can show a little bit of that today of what that means. And I know there's a lot of stuff going on with GitOps. I feel it's
so. I do want to see more. I'm curious when you say that you talk about the move is towards smaller clusters. Is that coming out of a need for security, to have stricter multi-tenancy, like to try to keep our customers deploying things in different spaces like that, or it's just purely around management, that having a large cluster isn't smart?
It's multiple reasons from my point of view. So security might be one. I think for me, it's also kind of workload placement, and potentially teams want to do their own things. They want to own it. So kind of like the role-based stuff. Kind of multi-tenancy is difficult. So which path do you take? Do you give the team their own cluster? As soon as the technology starts becoming a little bit easier, consistent, and cheaper, then of course the one cluster per team makes sense. Yeah. So we're getting there. I think there's stuff that's coming in, in OpenShift called Hypershift or hosted control planes. That's going to really change the paradigm. We'll see. That's exciting to me. That's like, okay, well, that's opening the door. But bear in mind that it has its cons as well.
At the other end of the spectrum is the edge side of thing as well. Like Kubernetes is our operating system for everything we do these days, and people are getting so familiar with that tooling and with that approach that they just want to take it further and further out into new domains, and that's how it proliferates out to the edge. And why can't we have tiny clusters that are super efficient, and use that exact same tooling all the way out?
100%. So we've seen some of the sectors, for example, mining, telecommunication, a lot of distributed architectures with IoT aggregation or specific functions running in disconnected state. I don't need to be able to call back central home and stuff like that. So there's some good points around the proliferation of, you had proliferation of VMs, you have proliferation of Kubernetes clusters as well, potentially for those type of scenarios where you need to scale hundreds or thousands of endpoints typically and manage them, in a comprehensive way, the same way that you'd manage a large cluster or whatever.
And so we've seen the survey. This is the biggest challenge right now. Red Hat has an offering. Simone, I think probably now would be a great time if you want to take us through some of, kind of as an example, of what is out there to actually, why we have all these clusters. How do we manage this? How do we do this in an easy way?
All right, so you happy for me to start sharing some slides on this one?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, and then I get the easy part because Wayne and James are doing all the live demo.
Yeah, that's right. So We'll let you set the stage and see how we go. So yeah, please.
All right. So so I think we've talked a little bit now the multi-cluster management challenges. Like, why do we have so many clusters? Like James mentioned, could be a distribution of functions between dev, prod, pre-prod, segmentation of those functions, geographical redundancy across like your productions environment. Or like Wayne mentioned, maybe it's a new way of doing tenancy model, right? Distributed clusters for different teams to simplify the tenancy of those. But the main problem is what was relatively easy to do for a single cluster, which is effectively on the left in terms of provisioning a cluster, deploying your applications in there, making sure there's no configuration drift on the cluster, you can patch and maintain it all the time. As you increase the number of clusters, this becomes more and more cumbersome and difficult, right? In terms of like, how do you consistently provision this cluster across the infrastructure you're after? Because you may be looking from an on-prem capability to a cloud capability, right? It depends where you're going to build those ones. How do you make sure you can enforce a set of policies and governance rules across those environments to make sure that you don't deploy an app, a dev app in production and vice versa, that you have a set of standard operating environments for your clusters, making sure they meet your access controls, your regulatory requirements, and so forth, right? And then once you have this fleet of clusters to manage, how do you easily troubleshoot and see what's happening within the environment in terms of like the metrics for the consumption of the nodes, what's happening in there, any type of resources deployed, how they deploy those type of things. And like we said, we can scale to like potentially some of the distributed telco architecture, you're talking thousands of endpoints, right, for that. So you need to have a way of providing a single pane of glass across everything and making sure you can deploy at scale a set of applications you can easily audit and comply to your specific requirements around this environment. So that's pretty much the challenges associated with the multi-cluster management at scale, right? So in the context of that problem, we have a set of solution on the Red Hat side of things, but our main product for this one is called ACM, Advanced Cluster Management for Kubernetes, that provide 4 key components for the multi-cluster capability. First one is the multi-cluster lifecycle management, how you create, import, manage clusters, patch them, upgrade them, right, as part of the lifecycle moving forward. The second one is really around the policy-driven governance, risk and compliance, how you make sure that your clusters comply with a set of rules defined around whatever would be your business requirements or legal requirements or whatever needs to happen within your environment, right? How do we enforce a set of rules and policies across those clusters? The third one is really around smart application lifecycle management and placement. So it relies, like Wayne was mentioning during the intro, around the GitOps concept, how you use Git as a source of truth for deployment of those applications and how you're able to deploy those applications at scale across your whole fleet of clusters. And the fourth function is really around the observability for health and optimization around your cluster fleet. Any question from the August or Dave on this one? I mean, even Wayne, James, if you guys want to chip in on this one, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we find with all this sort of functionalities, the observability tends to get a little bit ignored. So I think there's a lot of especially in the Kubernetes space, a lot of like assumption, okay, Kubernetes is a standalone thing and it's got its own observability and alerting, but how do you aggregate that? How do you make sure you have a single place to sort of view that? I'll be showing that in my section, but the crucial part is like also the overestimation of an actual cluster is becoming a massive concern. So how much compute memory, because all this costs money, are you actually spending on this, and how can you actually kind of move towards sort of a FinOps way of working, so understanding ownership of costs and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, see, that's another question I had that is around, and especially in this climate, is that partly what's driving the need for more multi-cluster management, right? We're cutting costs, but the customers are demanding more from everyone. So you got to do stuff better and faster and be more innovative, but with maybe less.
Yeah.
And so when you can put all this stuff together and manage something from a single spot or from a more consistent method, that must be a driving force, right? And you've kind of confirmed that. So it's important.
Absolutely. I could want me to go on to the next slides, or you guys anything else you wanted to add, or that's good?
carry
Team,
on.
I just noticed we had a question in the chat from Saad. Simon, can we explain a bit more on security, especially for telco use cases?
All right. So the security. So you can see, I think we're going to go through some of the demos in there, but the idea is you can define a set of policies to typically, there's multiple layers to it, right, from a security perspective. But from an ACM perspective, from a cluster and fleet management level, you can define a set of policies to provide a SOE compliant cluster. So it is standard operating environment. So what I see a lot of my customers do, they define through a set of policies. Hey, this cluster must be configured in this way, connect to this user, have these users and groups syncing to the AD environment, connect to the storage this way. We need to deploy by default all these network policies around the environment, this type of function, right? So effectively, see ACM as a way of driving the compliance around that. You can also, like Wayne was explaining, GitOps everything. So define a set of security components as part of ACM and sync them through Git, right? Through the GitOps approach. So define them in Git and sync them to your cluster using ACM as well. There's a different layer for it, which is a different set of product for more the management of deployment time and runtime capabilities of workloads on the cluster, which is another product called ACS, Advanced Cluster Security. And typically, we would see that both products work hand in hand to provide this end-to-end, if you want, package. See ACM more as a way of managing up-to-date SOE-compliant clusters, and ACS as a way of finding any type of runtime issues or someone trying to deploy something that shouldn't be there, that contain vulnerabilities and so forth. Anything you guys want to add to this one?
Yeah, I think we spoke about this previously, guys. I think it'd be great to do a bit of a section on ACS and security, how that translates to kind of these kind of use cases, and kind of the standards that you guys can set towards. So, I mean, in my experience doing CIS benchmarking, for instance, that was really hard. Tools like ACS help you to sort of not only get a snapshot view of your compliance requirements, but also the remediation. So anything you need to sort of apply and remediate to get that cluster compliant. So it's a great topic. I think we don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but and it's a very good question. So I think if we go and have another session, I think that would be exciting to cover.
That's right. I've got a demo on this one if you're interested, around ACM driving the deployment of the compliance operator, running the checks, the auto remediation, and then the results being automatically imported into ACS to see the overall compliance of the clusters like that. So it's a nice bundle if you want of those capabilities that Red Hat provides effectively.
Awesome.
From a telco point of view as well, ACM and ACS are being used quite significantly, especially where you have network functions deployments, where you want to have security not just on the data but also in transit and on the network capabilities. So there are some very good use cases and some very powerful things in ACS that kind of enable you to do that. So yes, we can have another session on that completely.
Yeah. And I think it'd be good to cover things like eBPF and how that's sort of changing the Kubernetes landscape. A lot of people talk about service mesh. What is that? I mean, ambient service mesh, which is the new stuff, using eBPF. That's very exciting because it means no sidecars, using eBPF technology, and it's pretty great stuff.
Yeah, Saad's question did bring about a very important point. Clusters these days have become one object, one unit, and now managing SOE on that entire unit, and how ACM can do that was, I guess, a lot of customers and a lot of people are interested in. I know we have a demo coming up, but I just wanted to put that thought out there.
Cool.
Thank you. All right. So from a business benefits perspective, typically you increase the development to production, or you accelerate the deployment of your applications across your environment, and it's always consistent using the GitOps approach. Obviously, you reduce cost as well. There's some cost optimization benefits in the context of managing those clusters at scale. You have a central view of everything. You have a console to handle the whole fleet of environment as opposed to having to go and connect into each of the environments separately. The application availability is an interesting one because as part of the tools, we are able to deploy an application across multiple clusters, for example. So in the context of the deployment of application in HA, for example, you can use tools like ACM to drive this type of deployment of workloads to make sure that if there's a critical failure on one of your clusters, the application is already available on the second cluster, right? So you can define set of patterns. I see my customers have deployment patterns based on the type of RTO, RPO, so recovery time objective and point objective for their applications, and put them into different type of tier if you want, and decide to deploy an application to one or multiple clusters based on that. And the last point is really around the compliance, right? You can write policies, you can define policies, and quickly see whether anything breaches a policy, be it for a configuration of the cluster, across maybe data manipulation and management onto the cluster. There's a lot of different options from which you can have a look at it from a compliance perspective. From typical use cases, and I should quickly stop on that, there's a set of use cases around on the left-hand side, the lifecycle management of the clusters, in the middle ground around the policy and policy enforcement, and on the right-hand side around the deployment of application, right? So typically managing clusters, but not just OpenShift. We have customers that have different flavors of Kubernetes, typically EKS, AKS, GKE, or the IBM Kubernetes solution as well. And we're able, with a tool like ACM, to manage at scale those fleet, right? And typically what's interesting, we can actually bring some of those workloads from some of the cloud to different type of Kubernetes distributions. So it's actually an interesting tool as ACM to be used for some of the application migration capability, which I see with my customers.
So sorry to jump in for a second. I just have an anecdote from some exploration earlier today. I was tinkering around with vCluster, which is a very cool open source project. But I deployed a virtual cluster inside an OpenShift cluster, and then imported the virtual cluster into ACM when the host cluster was already managed by ACM, and it worked. So anyway, I don't know what the use case is for that yet, but it was cool.
No, was it KubeVirt? Was it using KubeVirt as a virtualization?
No. So we'll probably talk about hosted control planes a little bit more at some point.
Yeah.
But vCluster is a super lightweight cluster virtualization approach. Effectively, all it is 2 pods, I think, to get a virtual cluster running inside a namespace on an existing cluster. And all I had to do was just grab the kubeconfig from that virtual cluster, give it ACM, and it managed it.
Oh, funny. That's really cool, actually.
And see, what I like about this is this highlights the flexibility of ACM. Yeah, it's great for managing OpenShift. It's great for even migrating into OpenShift, but it also can manage EKS, right? And that's important because, as we talked about at the beginning, there's a lot of sprawl. And at the end of the day, customers, whether they're our customers or whatever, they need to get stuff done and they need to be efficient. And this is going to help them with that because they're able to use the same tooling and the same method across different vendors. And I think that's just super, super powerful. And yeah, you can go down these corner cases, but that alone is so important to realize just getting your application out there in front of people easily and quickly and making it better. And no matter where it is, use the cloud you need to, use the style you need to. I know we'll see some of that, but yeah, I just think that's wonderful.
I think you bring about a very important point, August. In large organizations, enterprises, from a leadership point of view, they don't want their resources and engineers to be focused on one cloud, and this overarching view of managing all these clouds, where their teams specifically work on bringing applications online, puts onus on that. So that's a really good point.
Yeah.
All right, maybe I'll skip quickly because I think Wayne and James will do an awesome job at presenting some of those management of OpenShift policies and application at scale. I'm just going to talk a little bit quickly on some of the typical customer use cases I see over the last, I've seen over the last three years, basically. So the first one is really around driving infrastructure and consistent creation of standard operating environments as Kubernetes clusters, if you want, into any type of infrastructure, right? So as well as the lifecycling. So that's really, I want to be able to create an OpenShift cluster on-prem on any type of either bare metal or VMware or any type of hypervisor, and as well as maybe manage some of the Kubernetes distribution and create them in the cloud as well, be it AWS or Azure or Google, for example. The second point is really around the standardization of those clusters, right? Typically role-based access, AAA storage integration, automated integration into third-party tooling like CM, logging, and anything. Right? That's the idea. How do I drive when I deploy those clusters? How can I make sure that by default I deploy all those components and integrate into them as well? The third one is really around the single pane of glass for visibility, right? To be able to have a view across the whole fleet. And one that's interesting is the fourth one is like really the migrate applications between different environments. So I want to rebalance 2 different clouds. I want to be able to migrate from an existing environment to a different type of environment, right? And like I said, the migration could be due to rebalancing activity, could be due to like disaster recovery and business continuity. There's many reasons for it, but that's a very common use case. And finally, I want to be able to have the visibility and be able to troubleshoot and resolve issues across my federated domain effectively. That's pretty much the slides I had, August, for this part.
It's perfect, right? So it really gives us a picture of the why, of everything, of why we're doing this, what it can do. And yeah, as we've teased throughout this, let's actually see it. Let's prove it, right? Let's take a look at what's actually possible. And that's where we're going to bring Wayne in with his demo. I mean, you're not just here for your demo, man. We know that. But yeah, Wayne's got some demos that you've probably maybe seen some of his stuff on YouTube, or you've had him come in and stuff that are just really fascinating. So over to you, Wayne. Let's see how this thing goes.
Yeah, thanks, August. So one of the motivators for doing this actual piece of my demo was a customer's primary use case was to sort of get a handle of their EKS and AKS clusters. And, this whole talk about the single pane of glass and a single place to manage it, this is a great example of how you can use the tooling that Red Hat provides to sort of bring that, under your view, understand what's going on, and actually doing some more advanced sort of use cases around it. So you look over here, I'm logged into ACM, as Simon mentioned. So within ACM, of course, now the first thing I'm worried about is the clusters under management. So here's a good example of 3 clusters. Of course, the local one is the local host, the local ACM. And the other 2 are AKS and EKS. So, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. I've already got a view of, some cloud-provided EKS managed services and AKS managed services. So how did this happen? Now, one of the crucial things is with ACM, it's very extensible. So we have integration to Ansible. So in this example, what I did was from Ansible automation platform, which is our Ansible offering, our portal to drive Ansible workflow. I created a bunch of templates, and the templates you'll see, they're pretty basic, but the idea is, I'm able to create either an EKS or an AKS cluster, and you can pass sort of certain variables, credentials. You can have all that stuff securely stored. And you'll see in this example, I'm using a GitHub repo, which I can probably kind of share. Essentially, this is Ansible and Kubernetes. So it allows you to build any kind of Ansible, any kind of Kubernetes cluster using Ansible playbooks. It's really nice. It's quite simple to use. And of course, you can pass in a lot of, kind of required variables. You'll see there's all certain things I can pass there. And for the benefit of making this simple, I just kept it to the 2, well-known Kubernetes distros on the cloud providers.
Right, and so I really want to call that out. So you're not building OpenShift on these clouds. You built AKS.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
Using Ansible, visualizing it in ACM, right?
Yeah. And then, simple thing of me just importing my AWS and Azure credentials. And from that, of course, it's stored securely inside Ansible automation platform. Yeah. And then if you look in, say, like my projects, this is the link to the repo. So that's my repo that I forked. And essentially, you now have access to start creating, those actual clusters through the template piece. So really, it's not complicated. I think that the little bit of magic that's missing in here is the connection between Ansible automation platform and the access to this OpenShift cluster to actually kind of import these clusters to ACM. So, that's in that project. It gives you that capability, and that allows you to then now kind of pull in those under management. So we would have seen from Simon's slide deck, there's like this hub and spoke principle that we try to follow. So the hub being this hub cluster, spokes being these managed clusters. And once we've imported them, we can start doing some cool stuff. So let's start off and think about, okay, what can I do? Of course, I can sort of view details about these clusters. I can find out what the node makeup is, what the instance type, all that sort of stuff. They're searchable, like index and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's all right. I mean, what else can I do? We're going to get some value. So one thing to note, the observability piece is, of course, an add-on. And we use a project called Thanos. And Thanos is the ability to start aggregating all these lovely kind of Prometheus metrics. And you can see I didn't do much. I just pretty much kind of deployed that with the Ansible automation platform. And now I have detailed access to what's going on in these clusters. And again, this is really good for me to sort of understand my usage patterns. So as you can see, I've got this really in red now saying overestimation. What does that mean? It's like, well, clearly I haven't got enough workloads running on here. There's too much compute power and not enough workloads. That's really a good indicator saying, well, maybe I should start running some workloads on there. That's a good idea. What do you guys reckon?
So I think that's a very good point, Wayne. I mean, it also comes down to cost optimization and towards all organization thinking in terms of sustainability, right? Where if there's compute running, and if you don't have workloads, maybe turn them down. So this is great.
Totally, Dev. I think one of the things that we find is people build this massive cluster and then they try to put workloads and they wonder why things are costing so much. They don't have proper visibility. So I think from a simplest point of view, this having an indication on how this looks through ACM is brilliant. So
and to be clear, this is just part of it, right? This is part of ACM.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is sort of like out of the box, one of the first features.
And then you can hook that into an event-driven type of architecture. For example, publishing notifications around alarming and thresholds to a broker like Kafka or whatever, and get sucked that into to drive, for example, either through GitOps, the change in machine sets or machine autoscalers to scale down the cluster, for example, or drive a tool like Ansible to do something around shutting down some of those components, right? There's lots of cool stuff you can fully automate entirely based on that, right?
Totally.
One of the weird and wonderful use cases that I haven't actually played with personally yet, but I was just reading about the other day was, normally if we deploy a cluster, you've got some level of metrics collection and that sort of thing happening locally on that cluster. But with ACM, I haven't tinkered with it yet, but apparently you can fully offload the metrics collection from those maybe smaller optimized edge clusters and just have that central hub cluster, sucking in all those metrics and dealing with that rather than having any local collection happening.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, James. So, like, one of the biggest questions we get about ACM is like, what is the capability? How many kind of clusters can it manage? And, what's the scalability around this? So, one of the main drivers for ACM is telco use cases. And, we've sort of got up to, if I'm not mistaken, sort of around the 2,500, kind of managed clusters remit, almost 3,000, I think is the new version. So something like that. It's pretty powerful. So, as far as scalability is concerned, it's possible,
and you can make a hierarchy of those stuff, what we call the hub of hub as well. So ways of providing scaling, and you have like thousands of endpoints managed by an instance, and have aggregation of those instances effectively together. Yeah. But I mean, this is like for large, like talking those large North American providers, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be nice to have that problem, and no doubt there's they have that problem in a lot of parts of our APAC region. But not so much down here in Australia.
Just checked the latest version where we're up to 3,500.
There you go.
For the limit. So that's awesome. Yeah,
it's insane. So, okay, so moving along, one of the things that I probably wanted to dive into was around sort of governance that someone spoke about. So that's really good because I've created a whole bunch of policies. Now, the policies that I've created can go against a guideline, so NIST 800 or whatever you want to go for. And you'll see there's a whole bunch of policies I've created on here relating to the actual hub cluster itself. And quite a few cool things. I mean, I'll use GitHub for OAuth. I use group sync operator, the list goes on. So I can actually manage this cluster out of the box without doing anything using these GitOps policies. So what I'm going to do is, just something simple, just to sort of illustrate things. I'm going to go ahead and sort of create a policy around, say, like test namespace, for instance. So I want to do like a namespace creation on all these clusters, and I'm just going to call it the default namespace to store it there. And I'm going to say enforce it. Okay, so that means it's going to go ahead and apply this. And sorry, if I go back to the policy templates, what I want to do is say namespace must exist. And I'm going to add in here the namespace is just staging namespace or something, whatever. It's just arbitrary. So then go ahead and do that. So new placement rule. So placement rule pretty much, kind of where you want to put things, how you want to put things on all the different clusters. And, I have something called a cluster set. So I can start grouping these clusters together and make sure that I have the ability to, kind of execute on that. So you'll see that all the clusters have gone into the default cluster set. So that way I'm able to, kind of assign them. Okay, so that's really good. And I'm going to add a label expression. So in this case, I'm going to say, vendor is equal to the EKS and AKS clusters, and not the OpenShift one. And then apply that, and then submit it. So essentially what that's going to do now, it's going to go ahead, and if my test works right, it's going to go ahead and apply this against those clusters. And that way I can actually start doing, like more policies. I can add certain things. I can, take things away. So you get a feel for it. Now I can start bringing these clusters under management. This is quite good,
And Wayne, similar to what you've done for the cluster import, you can also hook some automation tool as part of that, right? So you can also drive that with an Ansible set of policies. So in case of a breach of the policy, there's also some extra function that Ansible could go and do, raise a ticket in ITSM or whatever you need to do with that, for example.
Totally. And, that way, exactly that. So there's a whole kind of automation suite that you can integrate into. In my example, obviously I've got the automation hub, kind of integrated there. I can do things. So yeah, you're right. So any kind of use case you think, okay, maybe that's not GitOps. Maybe I need to integrate that to sort of an Ansible playbook, stuff like that you can do. So the next thing I'm going to show you guys is creating an application. So, this example now would just be like a simple application. And, there's two ways of doing this. So we use Argo CD, so that's application sets.
Right, so that's the question I was going to have. When do we start integrating straight into GitOps? And when I see that come up, I go, look at that. I know subscription, right? I remember that. But, now you're talking direct integration with application sets.
No, I think probably a lot of the CLR people that I'm one of them myself will be like, why are you doing this for the UI? It's good for illustration, I think we want to show you guys how this works. I think a lot of people probably fall asleep if they just see a lot of CLR, but at the same time, I can do all of this on CLR. There's nothing stopping me. Cool. So I'm going to do like a simple WordPress kind of application. Again, this could be anything you want to. I've got various options. This option, I'm going to choose a Helm chart. So you can see I've already done this before. It's nice and simple. WordPress is the name, and I'm just going to choose this version. So again, I have something called a placement rule or a cluster set. So I'm just going to go for the default, and I'm going to call this environment is equal to dev labeling. So what that allows me to do is I can go ahead and deploy an application, but I can decide whether or not I want it on a certain cluster. So I'll go ahead and add that quickly. This will go now and sort of deploy it in a ready state. And you'll see that the application won't be deployed yet because I don't have any of those labels set. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I want to test this first on kind of the EKS side. So let me go ahead and label. And if you remember,
basically stage the application.
Yeah, correct. So now I want to say, okay, well, put it on the actual EKS cluster. And if I go back to the application, you can see already if I filter by subscriptions, the WordPress one has got one remote. So that's great. So it's already started to kick off the actual application deployment. And hopefully after a short amount of time, I should see this on my EKS cluster. So let me jump over to that, and I'm sure a few of you have probably seen the lovely AWS console, and maybe played around with EKS or have it in production, or done something with it. But it's always good to see this happening and what I've actually done. So having a look at this cluster, if I click under resources and I go to probably namespaces, all of a sudden I see the WordPress namespace created there. That's fantastic. So I've got an application deployed. I'm able to potentially even connect to that application. I'm able to do stuff. This is good. Okay, so I've got some consistency. And
I appreciate you using the AKS console to show this, to really show that this is happening on somewhere else. ACM has made sure that this has gone where it needs to go.
Yeah, which is great. So we're actually saying sort of like a more of a real world use case where people would need to manage applications. They need to do stuff, and of course I'm just going to probably don't remember where it is. Oh, there it is. I'm looking for the load balancer endpoint. So let's go to this and see what's happened. So excuse the self side, but I have WordPress deployed. So this is pretty simple. I know I'm trivializing it. There might be more complex applications, but I've got a place of starting with a nice kind of demo there. Next thing I want to do now is I want to go back to my clusters, and I want the same for my AKS cluster. So let's do that same exercise where I'm labeling the cluster itself. And remember, I made its environment is equal to dev. You could make it anything you want to, and I'll save it out. So just before I do that, make sure I'm not cheating. I'll just go into this and check the the namespaces. There's no WordPress, okay? So that's good. I'm not cheating. This is no smoke and mirrors. This is real stuff. Cool. So applications, again, it's automatically picked up too. And if I go back to there, let's give it a couple of moments. Probably needs a refresh. Hey, I've got WordPress. So there you go. It's like I've got this consistency. I've got the same, kind of Kubernetes objects. I'm able to deploy that. It's really showing you the power of, this GitOps sort of pattern and the ability to do that. So same method. I think it's pretty quick, this. I'm going to try and go to the load balance endpoint. And I think it's probably spinning up still. Don't be too hasty. I should hopefully see the same sort of thing deployed. So let's have a look. Maybe we'll just look under the workloads, under the pods. It's probably taking its time. Live demos, huh?
No, but it's looking good, right? I mean, we can see it there. We can see it coming up. And as you said, there's more complexity here, right? You're banging out this demo, and it's perfect for what we're needing to look at. And obviously, you get there. But it's really fascinating to see this. And like I said, using these two consoles, this is the reality for our developers today, right? They're bouncing across clouds.
Yeah. I mean, I think the typical conversation I have is around, people now looking towards moving to state on a cluster. Like, how do we manage state? And there's ways of doing this with various OpenShift technology. But I think for the moment, this is illustrating like a simple use case on a simple application itself. So yeah, give that a couple of moments. I think it's probably still starting up. The power of doing this as a live demo.
That's brilliant.
Just a very quick mention on cognitive burden as well, though. When you're in this kind of world, you've got these different control planes going on. Having one way or one sort of view into that's consistent, irrespective of what those other control planes look like, that's it. Even though it's a user interface, it's kind of a big deal, because even I just noticed it then. As you're flicking tabs between AWS and Azure, it's just this subtle back of the mind kind of thing. You've got to make those mental adjustments, and we can't underestimate that these days, like the effect that has on engineers and on people on a daily basis, just trying to stay on top of that kind of burden.
Yeah.
Spot on. I think you're right, mate. And I think what the biggest challenge being with a lot of this stuff is, do they are expected to learn Amazon and become an expert? Are they expected to learn Azure and become an expert? Like, I think for me, it's more like you put all your kind of skills and ability into learning GitOps patterns, and then those sort of things will filter out. And especially if you've got things like, kind of a controller that's able to talk to multiple platforms. Okay, so yeah, I think I've given a quick overview of ACM. There's a lot more to this tool. No doubt, I believe that there'll be a couple of questions, and people are interested to know more advanced use cases. But this is like a nice taster, I think, to seeing how this works and sort of the demand on us from technology providers. Cool. So I mean, that's it from me. I'll hand back to you guys. And
yeah. Well, and I think what's really important too, I just really want to follow up on James's point there, is that even just, it sounds dumb, but finding the refresh button in the Azure console, it's not a waste of time. But if I'm into code, I'm there. I don't want to pop out and go, oh, I'm in the blue screen now I'm in the yellow company screen. Oh, now I'm in the green one. Like I just need it to be there, and then let me use that extra 10% on getting great code or whatever I need to do, good business logic, whatever out there. So I love in this demo that you've done that you've literally gone to the tab and I've watched you click, and I'm thinking, oh God, yeah, where is it again in EKS? And it's just terrific because I don't want to do that, but it's great for a demo, right? It lets you do that for that demo.
Yeah, and okay, maybe all that good talking. Let's do a bit of a refresh and see if it come back. Yay!
Yeah, and look at your yeah.
So that's a bit of an interesting one because obviously it took a little bit more time. So I wonder what's going on in the Azure world.
Well, they're fine, I'm sure.
I'm sure they're fine. You never know, though.
World Cup stuff, I think.
Yeah, might be. There might be a bit of load. So let's see if I can get to. There you go. That's what I wanted to show you.
I know you wanted to see that. I knew you wouldn't feel satisfied.
Beautiful. I couldn't just leave it at that, but perfect. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So, okay. So, whoops. Apologies there. Knocked you right out. So, okay. So now we've talked a bit about managing all these clouds and getting our apps to all these clouds. What we have to deal with now is making these clouds kind of talk to each other and work with each other. And how do we get across them? And so, James, I think that's probably where you've got some stuff you'd like to share.
Yeah.
And so let's dive into that a little bit and understand that it's not just managing multiple clouds; it's actually working with and interconnecting them.
Sure is, and I'm going to talk about the use case first of what we'll call a progressive migration, and it's that eternal challenge of we've got something in point A, and we need to gradually move it or partially move it to point B. Some of the reasons here, like maybe you've got a data store that's sitting on premises, maybe we can't move that for sovereignty reasons or other issues. Maybe we still want to move the rest of the application and have some scaling out on clouds. Yeah, so I'll maybe in about 10 minutes or so, hopefully maybe a little less than that, I'm going to attempt to make it the simplest possible example of a progressive migration. So let's see how we go.
I'll bring your screen in.
Awesome. Okay.
Let's check this out.
So just to kick off, everything that I go through, all of the collateral behind this, it is on GitHub, and maybe it can be in the show notes or something at some point, but you can find it. So ACM, here's our dashboard. To keep things as simple as possible, I've just got 2 clusters here. They're both in AWS. And if we jump to our cluster list, we will see them there. There we go. Now, challenge being, how do we connect these clusters? How do we progressively migrate? How do we do it in a secure way? This is where I need to introduce a project called Submariner. And ACM, Advanced Cluster Management, has some pretty awesome features to integrate with Submariner out of the box and kind of make this process easy, because under the hood, there is a whole lot of complexity going on. So, Wayne briefly mentioned the concept of a cluster set. I'm going to head over to the cluster set tab and just point out, I've got a cluster set here called Submariner. And as you think about sort of connecting different Kubernetes clusters, you need to sort of think about, how should those be logically grouped? How should those be sort of logically be managed as one collection? In my case, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, and I've just got these 2 clusters in one cluster set. So if we have a look at it, here we go. And I just want to point out we've got a status down the bottom for Submariner add-ons and a tab up here, but our multi-cluster network status is healthy. That's good. So if we have a look at Submariner add-ons, here we go. So earlier today, I went through this process, standing up the clusters through ACM pretty quick, and then jumped into Submariner add-ons here and just hit install. And a whole lot of this complexity behind the scenes was taken care of for me automatically and magically. And out the other end here, we can see we've got a couple of nodes that have been labeled as gateways, and you can control that. And we've got an agent running in a namespace on each of these two clusters. And essentially, we have an IPsec tunnel between between these two clusters, dev A and local cluster.
So let me just ask you, so all you did to get this onto the clusters is install from here?
Correct, yeah. There was one gotcha I ran into with one parameter. So after I did the initial, click install Submariner add-ons, my connection status didn't turn to healthy, and I had to set one parameter for load balancer to true after reading a little bit of documentation. So one little gotcha, but other than that, I did it through ACM. Now, obviously, you can just drive it all through GitOps, through code. Everything behind the scenes is a Kubernetes cluster resource, and in the little walkthrough, I've got some mentions to how you do it in sort of both the code versus the UI way. But ACM does help abstract away a whole lot of that complexity. And if we have a look at the kind of use case side of things, let's think of our local cluster here as on-premises, and dev A as perhaps our cloud cluster that we're migrating to or partially migrating to. And if we jump forward, I'll point out we've got an application running currently. Here we go. Surprise, surprise, it is the classic Kubernetes guestbook. I think everyone's heard of this app at this point in time. It's been around forever.
It works.
But we've got a... What was that?
It works.
It works, yeah, it's great. So we've got a web front end and a Redis backend. And if we have a look at these, we can see it's running on our local, on-premise cluster for each one. As Wayne was kind of showing before, we can go and look at the topology and we can see all of the resources that our application has. There is one special resource I need to point out, though, for our Redis app. So if we have a look at our topology, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and I just want to highlight something called a service export. So, no real surprises here. I think we're all relatively familiar with the concept of a Kubernetes service at this point, but when we create this IPsec tunnel, this connectivity between our clouds, we can create, with Submariner, we can create this extra little resource here called a service export. Submariner is going to listen to that, and it's going to essentially make our service available on any clusters that are part of our cluster set. So remember, we've only got our 2 clusters in this one, but it can be as much of a mesh as you need. And when you create one of these service exports, the Submariner broker picks that up, and on all those other clusters, it'll create a corresponding service import, and essentially you can then reference your service on those other clusters. So what we'll do, just to actually make it a little bit interesting, is do a partial migration. So we're going to migrate our front end off to our other cluster, and then come back and verify that everything still works. So we probably should have a look at the app and just make sure it's working right now, right? So we'll look at our route, launch that up, and here we go. We've got our guestbook, the tried and true, the familiar. Maybe we can say hello from Kopi. And in theory, we want to make sure that after we migrate this, our application can still talk to the database and still, the Redis cache, and still see those entries. So let's give it a whirl. I'm going to share a different window here and just head to the terminal for one moment just to change these. Where are we? Here we go. So August, you should see a terminal coming through. Yeah, cool. So Wayne mentioned the idea of a placement earlier, a placement rule.
Yep.
We're going to have a look at a placement rule for guestbook in the ACM resources. There is a placement rule resource. And all we're going to do is change a single line. So we can have a look at this and see in the specification, we have a cluster selector looking at labels where the name is local cluster. Easy. So let's just change this to our other cluster, which is Dovey. And let's jump out of there and just apply that. So guestbook, there we go. Awesome.
Okay, so now we've just told it to move it, to migrate it.
Spot on. Yeah. So I'll jump back to.
For people like me, James, you would have to need that the GUI. Like this is hard to follow already.
Sorry, Simon. Yeah, I've got to bring the terminal in somewhere. I'm an addict. Yeah. All right. I'll jump back to browser for you then, and we'll finish this thing off. There we go. Windows. So there we go. Just for you, Simon. We'll head back to the safe space. Yeah. So okay, we've still got our application, but we can see it's now remote. Let's have a look. We'll go and look at our topology. We can see everything's green, everything's happy again. Let's go over to the actual cluster. And this is our remote cluster, and we can see our pods are over here now, our 3 front-end replicas. So let's check that the app still works, because it's now talking across clusters back to our on-premise to talk to its Redis cache. So we'll go to our route again, open it up, and away we go.
There it is.
Nice.
And we've still got our data. We're still happy. We're still good. But we've done a partial progressive migration.
Yeah. I think as that was awesome, mate. I think we take this for granted because the fact is we've got like a secure connection that's happening, between clusters, between sites, maybe data centers geographically. It's like, this is great stuff.
And what's I think yes. And what's so cool here is there was no infrastructure operation there, right? It was code. It was you just clicked a button. I know could do it on a CLI too, but you clicked a button for people like me and Simone, and there it was, right? It was you've now connected these 2 clusters, did what you did in code, and done.
And actually, the next layer above that, and we're currently working on this one with Wayne and James, is around applying a set of policies, because for people like at least myself that have like big fingers and click on the wrong level or whatever, I may have wanted to move the database, right? And I cannot, for maybe data residentiality, whatever, data regulations or whatever, you can start defining policies in ACM and say, by the way, this type of deployment, you're not going to put it into this like hyperscaler, for example, right? And then you block that through a set of policies. You can do that. There's a set of tools. You can use ACS or ACM plus the automation component for it. So there's a lot of like Wayne was mentioning, a set of policies to create namespaces. You can apply a set of policies to control as well some of the placement within the application as well. So still support the migration effort, like James was demonstrating for some of the component of the application, and restrict the migration of other capabilities in there.
Well, I think also what's important to note, our experience with a lot of customers has been, if you don't set up these guardrails for people using these platforms, we tend to find, it gets chaotic. It's out of control. So, like having these policies, having the way to kind of manage this, it helps it to scale, because inevitably we'll want to be supporting sort of like an SRE methodology. And we have managed services ourselves, Red Hat does. So this is important that we kind of follow that, way of managing Kubernetes at scale, really.
And I mean, the managed service cloud's important because that SRE team is managing an enormous amount of clusters behind Rosa and Arrow and OSD, and so they are really learning what is needed. And so we're getting these best practices coming from our engineers, going into our products, going upstream, going, it's everywhere, and it makes a huge difference. I love the example you gave, Simone, with the fat fingers, right? Because it happens, and developers are in that spot, and bang, out it goes. Yeah. Out it goes, and then ACM will stop it. It'll say, no, that doesn't go there.
That's why I don't do like James and Wayne. I record my demos and I present my videos basically, because the live demos every time. Oh, wrong rule. Sorry. Oops, wrong placement.
So that's the thing, right? They can use you as the pawn, right? They'll set you up, go live, and
that's what they do.
No, that was amazing, right? I mean, we've been able to build on understanding some of the industry issues and seeing the solutions out there, but actually seeing how they work. And there's so much more here. I know that there's just a ton more that could be talked about. You can layer in things like ACS, so advanced cluster security for Kubernetes. There's so many things we can add. It's just fascinating to me.
And the fact that the security is embedded every function, like, James was presenting, like you have a specific function set of Kubernetes CRs, right, associated with the export of a specific service and the import of those services as well, right? So it means you're in control of, or security can be in control of what you can export and not export. And even that, if you stuff up this component, we can apply a set of policies to block those deployments, either by ACS or some of the policy and governance in ACM as well, right? So there's like multiple layers of security you can add to each of those functions to make sure that you, no matter how big fingers you have or someone doesn't know what they're doing, you stop that from happening, maybe.
And it isn't even big fingers and screw ups. It's just the complexity and the sprawl that's happening that we talked about, right? So it's there. It needs to be there. There's reasons for it. Some's government regulations. Some might just be simply, it makes more sense to be in multiple clouds. And so we joke at your expense because it's always fun, but that, about people making mistakes, but it is really just about, it is just best practice. And this keeps that in line. So, wow. I mean, that's quite a collection of things. And we've been in here over an hour, and I think that is spectacular. What I do want to do is make sure that if there's any links and stuff, we'll go ahead and load those into the notes and under the video, because there's some great stuff. And you can reach out to these guys. They're always excited to talk to you, to understand whether it's a customer case or just upstream stuff. It's great to speak about. So I highly encourage that. What I do like to do as I go around, as we wrap up here, is give everyone a final chance. Usually no one has too much to say, but if you have a last couple of words, maybe we'll go in the same order to you, James.
Last words. That was about the simplest Submariner example you'll ever see, and I'm just picking up on what you're saying. There is a whole lot more you can do, and a whole lot more use cases for that connectivity. And yeah, for any Kiwis that want to have a chat, yeah, Wellington based, get in touch. Always keen to talk about this stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Simone.
Yeah, just go friends for the soccer.
All right, so we'll be removing you from the stream now. No. Healthy competition is good competition. Yeah, absolutely. And Wayne, to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. I think this is a really good opportunity to sort of collaborate. I think one of the things I do love about working at Red Hat is just the open source, open sort of way we approach things and share things. Crucially, everything we do is all open source. I'm looking forward to the Kubernetes event in August. I think you've inspired me to sign up, and I think I'm going to go check that out, because I think it's important for us to talk to the community, talk to the customers, find out what's going on. Love this tech, and yeah, happy to have a chat. No problem.
Excellent. Thank you. And Dev, great having you here. What do you think?
I'd first like to thank our presenters. What insightful show we've had. And not one, but 2 demos. How good is that? And both of them are so fantastic. I'm just blown away. Really, thank you. A lot of things were covered, and I know, people have questions. And like all of you said, if you have any questions, reach out to these folks. They talk to customers every day, day in, day out. They have answers. And yeah, thanks again.
Okay, well
Thanks,
said.
guys. Thanks, everyone.
So, one last thing to say, Red Hat Summit Connect is coming up in APAC starting in September 4th, I think, in Sydney. So that is always exciting. You can actually see folks probably involved here, but all of our Red Hat associates many are going to be attending and answering your questions. So there's a link there. I'll put that in the notes. And of course, if you're looking for other shows or you want to keep track of us, we're on the streaming calendar. You can easily find us, and keep in touch with everything that's going on there. And that is a very exciting end to another Kopi Hour. So with everyone, thank you. As Dev said, you've been wonderful presenters, 2 excellent live demos. Thank you so much for joining. Enjoy the World Cup, and we will catch you next time with Kopi or water or whatever you want to bring along. So thank you,
Thanks
everyone. Take care.
very much.
Thanks, team.
Cheers.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.